My best friend's blood was still drying on my hands when they put the handcuffs on me. But I didn't spill that blood. I found her body. And when I screamed, no one heard it as a cry of innocence. Everyone thought a killer had been caught. Then came the evidence, the nail marks on my back. Margaret's nail marks. They said I fought with her, struggled with her. No, those marks weren't from a fight. They were from the night I was with her husband in her bed, while Margaret knew nothing. He made me leave those marks with passion. Then he used those same marks to make me a murderer. I couldn't say this in court. Who would believe me? 5 years, 1,825 days. Every night I asked myself the same question. I didn't kill her, but did I drive her to her death? To this day, I don't know the answer. She sat leaning forward in the armchair, as if carrying the weight of a confession, but she hadn't said anything yet. Even her breathing told a story, shallow, controlled, held not to keep something out, but to keep something in. You just got out of prison, I said softly. But freedom isn't what brought you here, is it? She raised her head, and I looked into her eyes for the first time. I saw 5 years of darkness there. But deeper still, there was an older wound. Being free, she said, her voice trembling, can be the heaviest sentence sometimes, because inside I was guilty. As a murderer, outside I'm still guilty, but of a different crime. I betrayed my best friend, and that man used my body to kill her. Now tell me, Dr. Bennett, am I really innocent? In some sessions my patients healed as they talked, but some stories never left my mind. Today I'm going to tell you one of those lives. If you're listening to this story and you have things you can't hold inside, share what you're going through and where you're listening from in the comments. I read every comment. I hear every story. If you want to hear more unforgettable therapy stories, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If this story touched your feelings, you can support me by liking. One day, I'd love to hear your story too. If you want me to share your story in my next video, you can send it to the email in my profile. Remember, our stories heal, even just a little, when they're shared. Her name was Diana. 47 years old, former accountant at a prestigious firm downtown. When she walked into my office that Tuesday afternoon, I noticed something immediately. The way she held herself. Shoulders curved inward, arms wrapped around her midsection, not defensive, protective, like she was trying to hold the pieces of herself together with her own 2 hands. She had been released 3 weeks ago, 5 years in a maximum security women's prison for a murder she didn't commit. The real killer? He was out there somewhere, living his life, spending the $2 million in insurance money, planning a future with a woman Diana had never even heard of until the truth came out. But here's what struck me. Diana didn't come to me for the injustice. She didn't come for the lost years. She didn't come to process the horror of prison. She came for something else entirely, something that scared her more than 5 years behind bars. I need to understand something, Dr. Bennett, she whispered, her fingers digging into the armrest. I need to understand why I am the way I am, why I couldn't control myself, why I destroyed everything I loved. In 22 years of practice, I've learned that the most revealing moments in therapy aren't when patients speak. They're the silences before they speak, the way their body tenses, the direction their gaze travels. Diana's gaze went to the window, then the door, then her hands. Escape routes, threats, evidence. A woman who had learned to scan every room for danger. Margaret was my best friend for 15 years, she continued, her voice gaining the slightest edge. 15 years. We shared everything, dreams, fears, secrets. Her jaw tightened. Almost everything. I watched her knuckles turn white as she pressed her nails into her palms. There was one secret I never told her, something I carried alone for 3 years before she died. And that secret, her voice cracked. That secret is why I'm sitting in this chair instead of living my life. That secret is why Margaret is dead. What was Diana hiding? What drove a successful accountant, a devoted friend, into a 3-year affair with her best friend's husband? And how did a man she thought loved her turn her into the perfect scapegoat for murder? The answers would take weeks to uncover. But even in that first hour, I sensed something beneath the affair, beneath the betrayal. A wound so old she might not even remember when it started bleeding. But before we get there, I need to tell you about the obsession, the hunger that lived inside Diana since childhood, the things she never told Margaret, the things she barely admitted to herself. Because without understanding that hunger, you cannot understand how a woman could betray the one person who truly loved her. Tell me about your childhood, Diana. She flinched. A micro-movement. Her left shoulder pulled back half an inch, her chin dropped a quarter of a degree. Most people wouldn't notice, but 22 years of watching trauma survivors had trained my eyes to catch what the conscious mind tries to hide. What does my childhood have to do with any of this? Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. I'd like to understand who you were before you became who you are. Her arms uncrossed, a brick falling from the wall she'd built. Slowly, carefully, she placed her hands on her knees. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, Millbrook, population 3,000 on a good day. My father worked at the steel mill, Harold Mercer, 32 years on the floor until his back gave out. My mother, Evelyn, was a housewife, 2 brothers, both older, Kevin and Thomas. She recited this like reading from a census form. No emotion, no texture, just data. And what was it like growing up in that house? 7 seconds of silence. I counted. Quiet. It was very quiet. The way she said quiet told me more than 100 pages of case notes. Not peaceful quiet, not comfortable quiet. The kind of quiet that hides things. The kind of quiet that teaches children to become invisible, to take up no space, to need nothing from anyone, because no one is coming to help. What were your parents like? Start with your mother. Diana's gaze drifted to a spot on my wall, somewhere far away. My mother was a ghost. She cooked, she cleaned, she ironed my father's shirts with military precision. He would check them, actually check them for wrinkles, and if he found one, he wouldn't say anything. He'd just lay the shirt on the table and stare at her until she took it back. Her breathing had changed, faster now, shallower. She smiled when she was supposed to smile, nodded when she was supposed to nod, but she never really saw me. I could walk into a room and she'd look right through me, like I was furniture, like I was part of the wallpaper. How did that make you feel? I didn't know how it made me feel. Not then. I thought that's just how mothers were. I thought being invisible was normal. Emotional neglect is the invisible wound. It leaves no bruises, no scars that doctors can photograph for evidence, but it carves a hole in a child's developing psyche, a desperate, aching hunger to be seen, to be noticed, to matter to someone. And that hunger, if left unfed, can drive a person to seek validation in the most destructive places imaginable. And your father? Something shifted in Diana's posture. Her spine straightened, her shoulders squared, a soldier preparing for inspection. Harold Mercer was a man of rules. Everything had rules. Dinner at 6 sharp, not 6:01, not 5:59. Homework completed before any other activity. Church every Sunday in pressed clothes. Bedtime at 9. No talking back, no questions, no crying. What happened if someone broke the rules? You didn't break the rules. But if someone did, her hand moved to her left forearm, an unconscious gesture. Her fingers traced a line just below her elbow. He had a belt, brown leather, brass buckle. He called it the teacher. Her voice had flattened, dissociated. I learned not to break the rules. Physical discipline paired with emotional neglect creates a particularly damaging combination. The child learns that attention only comes through punishment, that the only time a parent truly sees them is when they're being hurt. This can wire the developing brain to associate pain with connection, a pattern that often haunts survivors well into adulthood. And your brothers? You mentioned Kevin and Thomas. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Diana's entire body went still. Not calm, frozen. The stillness of prey that senses a predator. Thomas was the oldest, 9 years older than me. He was gone by the time I was 8, joined the army, never looked back, sends a Christmas card every few years. We've never been close. And Kevin? The silence stretched between us. 10 seconds. 20. Her fingers had returned to her palms, nails digging crescents into the flesh. Kevin was different. Different how? He noticed me. 3 words. In 22 years of practice, I've learned that the most devastating revelations often come in the smallest packages. He noticed me. For a child starving for attention in a house of ghosts and rules, those 3 words could mean salvation. Or they could mean something much darker. Would you like to tell me about that? Her jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles jumping beneath her skin. Not yet. That's okay. We have time. But I already knew. The way she held herself. The way she'd flinched when I mentioned childhood. The desperate hunger for attention that had driven her into Richard's arms. The pieces were forming a picture I had seen too many times before. And what I suspected, what I dreaded hearing confirmed, would explain everything about the woman sitting across from me. Tell me about Margaret. How did you meet? For the first time since she'd walked into my office, something soft appeared on Diana's face, a genuine emotion breaking through the armor. Her shoulders dropped an inch. Her hands unclenched. Ohio State. First week of freshman year. We were assigned as roommates in Baker Hall. I walked in with one suitcase, just clothes, nothing personal, nothing that said, "This is who I am," and she had decorated the entire room already. A ghost of a smile crossed her lips. Posters of bands I'd never heard of, fairy lights strung around her bed, a bright pink bedspread covered in yellow flowers, photos of her family everywhere, her parents, her sister Caroline, their golden retriever named Biscuit. Diana shook her head slowly. I thought she was ridiculous. All that color, all that life, it was overwhelming. And what did she think of you? She told me years later, she thought I was the saddest person she'd ever seen. Said I walked in looking like I was apologizing for existing, like I expected to be told there'd been a mistake and I needed to leave. Was she right? I didn't think so then. I thought I was fine. Normal. I had no idea what normal actually looked like. Diana's voice caught. But yes, she was absolutely right. I was dying inside and I didn't even know it. Margaret saw Diana. Perhaps for the first time in Diana's life someone truly saw her, not as furniture, not as a rule follower, not as an invisible presence, but as a person worthy of attention and care. For someone starved of recognition since childhood, this would have been intoxicating. Life-changing. It would create a bond stronger than most people can imagine, and potentially a dependency that could become its own kind of prison. How did your friendship develop? She wouldn't leave me alone. Diana laughed, a real laugh, bitter and sweet mixed together. She dragged me to parties I didn't want to attend, made me try foods I'd never heard of, introduced me to people as my friend Diana before I'd even agreed we were friends. That sounds intense. It was. Margaret was... She was a force. When she decided something, it happened, and she decided I was worth saving. Diana's voice dropped. She had no idea what she was taking on. What do you mean? Margaret came from a good family. James and Patricia Chen, her father was a cardiologist, her mother a school principal. They had dinner together every night. They told their daughters they loved them. They showed up to every recital, every game, every parent-teacher conference. Diana's hands twisted in her lap. She had no frame of reference for what I came from. She just saw a sad girl and wanted to fix her. Did she fix you? She tried. God, she tried. 4 years of college, she was my anchor. When I had panic attacks at 3 a.m., she held me. When I couldn't eat for days, she sat with me until I managed a few bites. When I finally told her... Diana stopped. Her throat moved as she swallowed hard. When I finally told her about Kevin, she was the first person who said it wasn't my fault. What happened with Kevin that needed forgiveness? What secret had Diana carried into adulthood, weighing her down like stones in her pockets? The answer would come. But first, I needed to understand the woman Margaret had become, and the man she would marry. Tell me about Margaret. Not just what she did for you. Who was she as a person? Diana leaned back, considering. Margaret was brilliant, not just smart, brilliant. She could have done anything. Been a doctor like her father. Run a company. Changed the world. Diana's voice grew wistful, but she chose social work. Wanted to help foster kids. Said she couldn't imagine children growing up without someone to fight for them. She sounds remarkable. She was. She was also naive. She believed in people. Believed everyone had good in them if you looked hard enough. She couldn't conceive of true malice. Diana's jaw tightened. That's what made her perfect prey. The setup was emerging. A woman of extraordinary empathy paired with an inability to recognize predators. It's a tragically common combination. The very qualities that make someone a healer can also make them vulnerable to those who exploit compassion. When did Margaret meet Richard? Diana's entire demeanor changed. Her posture stiffened, her breathing shortened. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. 3 years after college, she called me so excited she could barely speak. I met someone, Diana. I met the someone. I could hear her smile through the phone. What did she tell you about him? Richard Hayes, 34 years old, finance executive at a major investment firm. His office was on the 47th floor of a building in Manhattan. He drove a silver Porsche. He wore suits that cost more than my monthly rent. Diana's lip curled slightly. She was dazzled, and why wouldn't she be? He was everything her parents would have wanted for her. Successful, educated, charming. You said charming. Tell me more about that. Richard Hayes was the most charming person I've ever met. When you talked to him, you felt like the most important person in the world. He remembered details, your birthday, your favorite wine, that offhand comment you made about loving the mountains. He'd reference conversations from months before, making you feel truly heard. She stopped, collecting herself. I know now what that was. Predatory charm. He was cataloging information, building profiles, finding weak points. Her voice hardened. But at the time, I just thought he was remarkable. Predatory individuals often display exceptional social intelligence. They study their targets with the attention of a scientist, learning exactly which buttons to push to create feelings of connection and trust. This behavior is sometimes called love bombing, an intense campaign of attention and affection designed to create emotional dependency. It's devastatingly effective against people with histories of neglect or abandonment. When did you first meet Richard in person? Their engagement party. Margaret flew me in from Chicago. I'd moved there after college for a job at an accounting firm. She wanted me to be her maid of honor. I said yes before I even bought my plane ticket. Describe that first meeting. Diana closed her eyes. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. The party was at his apartment. Penthouse, views of the entire city, crystal chandeliers, a bartender in a white jacket, everything perfect. She opened her eyes. Margaret was glowing, absolutely glowing. She grabbed my hand the moment I walked in and pulled me through the crowd to meet him. And when you saw him? He turned around, dark hair, gray at the temples, sharp blue eyes, the kind of face that belonged on magazine covers. Diana's hands began to tremble. He smiled at me, took my hand and said, "So you're the famous Diana. Margaret's told me everything about you. I feel like I already know your soul." A tear slid down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. And I felt it. Right there, in front of my best friend at her engagement party, I felt something I had never felt before. Want. Pure, terrifying want. Not just attraction, not just chemistry. A hunger so deep it scared me. The obsessive attachment Diana had mentioned in our opening minutes, here was its genesis. A lifetime of starvation, meeting someone who offered the illusion of being fully seen. Her nervous system wouldn't have recognized the danger. It would have only registered. Here is someone who sees me. Here is someone who wants me. After 40 years of feeling invisible, that pull would have been nearly impossible to resist. Did something happen that night between you and Richard? No, he was a perfect gentleman, attentive to Margaret, charming to everyone. But she hesitated. His eyes kept finding me, across the room. Brief moments, a second too long, and each time I felt that same jolt, like electricity. Did Margaret notice? No, Margaret never noticed anything wrong with Richard. That was her gift and her curse. She saw the best in everyone, even the people who were already planning her destruction. After the engagement party, what happened? I went back to Chicago, told myself it was nothing, a moment of insanity. Margaret was my best friend, my only real friend. I would never do anything to hurt her. Diana's voice turned bitter. I was so sure of my own morality. But the feeling didn't go away. It got worse. Every time Margaret called to talk about wedding plans, I gripped the phone so tight my knuckles went white. When she sent photos of her and Richard, I'd stare at them for hours. Not at her, at him. Diana's breathing had quickened. I started having dreams about him, waking up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, body aching. Did you recognize what was happening? I knew it was wrong. I knew it was sick, but I couldn't stop. The thoughts came whether I wanted them or not. It was like being possessed. She gripped the armrests. I've never told anyone this. Not even Margaret, especially not Margaret. What Diana was describing sounded like limerence, an involuntary state of obsessive longing for another person. Often mistaken for love, limerence is actually a symptom of attachment dysfunction. The brain becomes fixated on a particular person as the solution to deep emotional needs that were never met in childhood. It's not a choice, it's a compulsion, and for someone with Diana's history, it would have felt completely beyond her control. Diana, I want to ask you something about the obsessive thoughts. You mentioned earlier that you've always been this way. Can you tell me more about that pattern? She nodded slowly. The confession seemed to cost her something. It started young, 11, maybe 12. A boy in my class smiled at me once, just once, and I couldn't stop thinking about him for months. I wrote his name in notebooks. I memorized his schedule. I found reasons to walk past his house. Her cheeks flushed with shame. Then he moved away, and I transferred everything to someone else, and then someone else. Did it always feel the same, this intense? Always, all-consuming. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't think about anything else. My grades would slip, my other friendships would suffer. Everything else became static compared to the person I was obsessed with. And Richard was the most intense, by far. The others were practice, preparation for destruction. Diana met my eyes. Richard was the apocalypse. How does a childhood of invisibility create a woman who becomes consumed by obsession? And what role did Kevin play in wiring Diana's brain for this particular kind of suffering? The connection between her brother's attention and her adult patterns was becoming clearer. But Diana wasn't ready to go there yet. We had to travel through the affair first, through the betrayal, through the night Margaret died. Tell me how it started, the affair with Richard. Diana's hands balled into fists, her knuckles went white. I moved to New York, 2 years after their wedding. Margaret was thrilled. She'd been asking me to relocate since the engagement. Just like college, she kept saying. Best friends together again. I told myself I was moving for my career, a better firm, better opportunities. She laughed without humor. I was lying to myself and I knew it. What happened after you arrived? The first few months, nothing. Richard was polite, friendly, appropriate. Margaret and I were inseparable again. Brunches, shopping trips, long walks in Central Park where she told me about her work with foster children, her plans to start a family. Diana's voice cracked. She wanted to name her first daughter after me. When did Richard's behavior change? Gradually. So gradually I didn't see the trap closing. He started finding reasons to see me alone. Coffee to plan Margaret's surprise birthday. Dinner when Margaret was traveling for a foster care conference. He was always so reasonable about it. So considerate. She stood abruptly, walked to the window, stared out at the city. He was patient. Months of small touches, a hand on my back, fingers brushing mine when he handed me a glass of wine. Compliments that walked right up to the line but never crossed it. Margaret's lucky to have a friend like you. You look beautiful tonight. Margaret must be jealous. He was building something. Brick by brick. Classic grooming behavior. Predators don't rush. They understand that patience is their most powerful tool. By the time the line is finally crossed, the victim has been so thoroughly prepared that it feels like their own choice, their own desire, when in reality, they've been manipulated into a position where saying no feels almost impossible. The first time, Diana turned from the window but didn't return to her seat. Margaret was visiting her parents for a week. Richard called, said he needed help picking out an anniversary gift. Could I meet him at a jewelry store? Did you go? Of course I went. I told myself I was helping my best friend. I told myself it was innocent. Her voice dropped. We never made it to the jewelry store. What happened? He picked me up in his car, started driving, talking about his marriage, how Margaret didn't understand him, how lonely he felt, how when he was with me, he felt like himself for the first time in years. Diana wrapped her arms around herself. We ended up at his office. The building was empty, just us on the 47th floor, looking out at the whole city. Her voice became mechanical, flat, the tone of someone describing something that happened to someone else. He kissed me, and I didn't stop him. I didn't want to stop him. Everything I'd felt since that engagement party came rushing up and I didn't. You don't have to describe the details. I want to. I need to. She finally sat back down. Her eyes were dry, but haunted. Because what happened next is what killed Margaret, not that night, but what that night started. For 3 years, Diana betrayed her best friend. 3 years of stolen moments, of lies, of watching Margaret plan a future that was already poisoned. What drove her to continue? What kept pulling her back to a man she knew she should avoid? And when did Richard begin planning something far worse than an affair? Tell me about those 3 years. Do you know what it's like to hate yourself and still not be able to stop? Every time I told myself never again, every time I swore it was over, and then he would call and I would go, like a dog returning to its master. What was it about him that held such power over you? Diana considered the question carefully. Her answer, when it came, was barely audible. He made me feel like I existed. When we were together, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't the ghost girl from Ohio. I was wanted, desired, chosen. She met my gaze. You have to understand. I'd spent my entire childhood being nobody, and suddenly this powerful, successful, beautiful man wanted me. Not Margaret with her perfect family and her bleeding heart. Me, the broken one. This is how trauma creates vulnerability. Diana's childhood hadn't just made her invisible, it had convinced her that invisibility was what she deserved. When Richard offered her the opposite, it triggered a neurological response more powerful than any drug. Her brain, starved for validation since age 7, would have flooded with dopamine every time you paid attention to her. Breaking that cycle would have required recognizing a pattern she couldn't even see. During those 3 years, were you ever in Margaret's home? Diana's face twisted with self-loathing. Yes, many times. Sometimes Margaret would be traveling for work. Sometimes she'd just be at the office late, and I would be there, in her kitchen, in her living room, in her bed. Diana's voice broke. Do you understand what kind of person does that? What kind of monster? I understand what kind of wounded person does that. A person who learned early that attention, any attention, is love. A person whose brother taught her that boundaries don't exist. A person whose mother taught her she didn't deserve to be seen. Diana stared at me. Tears finally began streaming down her face. You're trying to make me feel better. It's not working. I'm trying to help you understand yourself. There's a difference between understanding and excusing. What you did was wrong, but how it happened, why you were vulnerable to it, that's what we need to examine, not to erase the guilt, but to ensure it never happens again. It can never happen again. Margaret is dead, but you're still alive, and patterns that aren't understood tend to repeat. Diana's patterns ran deeper than a 3-year affair. They wound all the way back to a quiet house in Ohio, to a brother who noticed her, to a mother who looked through her like glass. Before we could reach the night of Margaret's murder, we had to descend into that darkness. Diana, I think it's time we talked about Kevin. Her entire body went rigid. The transformation was instant, from weeping woman to statue. Her eyes fixed on a point beyond my shoulder. Her breathing became shallow, almost imperceptible. What do you want to know? Whatever you're ready to tell me. The silence stretched. 30 seconds. A full minute. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed. Higher, younger. The voice of a child trapped in a woman's body. I was 7 when it started. Kevin was 16. He had his own room in the basement. My father had finished it for him as a reward for making the football team. Our parents never went down there. She stopped, drew a breath that seemed to take enormous effort. He called them special games, said they were what people who loved each other did, said I was his favorite person in the whole world, said it had to be our secret because Mom and Dad wouldn't understand how special we were to each other. The language of grooming. Predators, even teenage ones, instinctively know how to frame abuse as love, how to isolate their victims, how to weaponize a child's desperate need for connection. Kevin had found the perfect target in his neglected little sister. She was starving for attention, and he offered it, wrapped in poison. How long did it continue? 4 years, until he left for college. Every time our parents weren't watching, which was most of the time, he would find a way to get me alone. Her hands were shaking violently now. I learned to disappear inside my head, to go somewhere else while it was happening, a place where I wasn't, where I didn't. You don't have to continue. Yes, I do. Her voice hardened. Because this is why. This is why I am the way I am. This is why I couldn't stop going back to Richard, even though I knew it was destroying everything. This is why I needed to be wanted so badly I would burn down my own life to feel it. What did Kevin teach you about love? That it hurts, that it's secret, that you have to give your body to get it, that the person who wants you controls you. Diana wiped her face roughly. He didn't just abuse me, he programmed me, made me into the perfect victim for every predator who came after. Childhood sexual abuse fundamentally rewires the developing brain. It creates distorted templates for intimacy, confusion between violation and affection, between control and love. Survivors often develop what's called repetition compulsion, an unconscious drive to recreate the dynamics of their abuse in adult relationships, seeking mastery over traumas they couldn't control as children. Diana's affair with Richard wasn't just moral failure. It was a psychological pattern established when she was 7 years old. Did anyone ever find out? Your parents? Never. My mother looked through me every day and never once asked why I'd stopped speaking at dinner, why I flinched when anyone touched me, why I started failing classes. The bitterness in Diana's voice was overwhelming. She saw nothing because seeing would have required doing something, and that would have disrupted my father's perfect household. And your father? Harold Mercer only saw two things: rules and rule breakers. I was quiet. I followed the rules. Therefore I was invisible to him. The perfect daughter, silent and obedient. She laughed, a hollow, terrible sound. Isn't that ironic? His abuse made Kevin. Kevin's abuse made me, and none of us ever talked about any of it. Where is Kevin now? Married, 2 daughters, lives in California, sells insurance. Diana's voice was ice. He sent me a Christmas card from prison, wrote thinking of you with a little smiley face, like we were old friends, like nothing ever happened, a monster living a normal life, daughters of his own. Had he done to them what he did to Diana, or had she been special, his only victim? These questions haunted me as I listened, but we had to keep moving forward, through the affair, through the murder, through the 5 years of hell that followed. Tell me about the day Margaret died. Diana went pale. This was the center of the wound, the black hole around which everything else orbited. It was a Tuesday, October 15th. I remember because it was exactly 3 years to the day since the first time Richard and since the affair started. She rubbed her arms as if cold. I didn't realize the significance until later. He'd planned it that way. Everything was planned. Walk me through that day. Richard called me that morning, said he needed to see me. Urgent. Margaret would be at work until late, a foster care court hearing that was expected to run long. Could I meet him at the apartment? Margaret's apartment? No, they'd moved by then, a townhouse in Brooklyn. Brownstone, beautiful place. Her voice cracked. I'd help Margaret pick out the curtains. What happened when you arrived? He was different that day. Intense. Urgent. He said Margaret had been asking questions, said she'd found something, he wouldn't say what, said we needed to end things for a while, cool off. How did you feel about that? Relieved. God help me, I was relieved. The guilt had been eating me alive. Every time I saw Margaret's face, I wanted to confess everything. Part of me wanted to be caught, to have the decision made for me. What happened next? Diana's breathing quickened, her hands gripped the armrests. We were together. One last time, he said. The way he touched me was different. Rougher. He kept scratching my back, making me scratch his. Something to remember me by, he said. I thought it was passion. I thought he was sad about ending things. He was creating evidence, planting Margaret's DNA under Diana's nails, leaving his mark on her skin in a way that would later be interpreted as struggle, as violence, as murder. The premeditation was chilling. After, he left, said he had a business dinner, kissed my forehead, said, "Take care of yourself, Diana." She shuddered, like he knew it would be the last time. And then, I went home, took a shower, tried to convince myself that ending things was the right choice, that maybe I could repair some of the damage, be a real friend to Margaret again. Her voice shattered. Then my phone rang. Margaret? Margaret. Her voice was strange, tight. She said she needed to talk to me. Something about Richard. Something she'd discovered. Said she couldn't tell me over the phone. Could I come over? What did you think she'd found out? Us. I was certain she'd found out about us. My heart was pounding the entire drive over. I was ready to confess, to beg forgiveness, to lose the only real friendship I'd ever had. But that's not what she wanted to tell you. I never found out what she wanted to tell me. Diana's entire body began to tremble. The next words came out in pieces. The front door was unlocked. I called her name. Nothing. I walked through the house. The kitchen light was on, and I found her, on the floor. Blood everywhere, her eyes open but seeing nothing. Take your time. I dropped to my knees. I held her. I tried to find a pulse. I screamed so loud the neighbors called the police. Diana's face was wet with tears, and 10 minutes later, I was in handcuffs. My best friend's blood on my clothes, her nail marks on my back, her husband's scratches under my fingernails. The perfect crime. Richard had murdered his wife, or hired someone to do it, and constructed a frame so complete that Diana never stood a chance. Every piece of evidence pointed to her. Her affair provided the motive. Her presence at the scene provided the opportunity. Her own body provided the physical evidence. She had walked directly into a trap 3 years in the making. But here's what no one knew. Not the police, not the jury, not even Diana herself until years later. Richard hadn't planned the murder for Diana's benefit. He had another woman, a woman named Elise. And Diana? Diana was never his lover. She was always just the fall. The trial lasted 3 weeks. My attorney argued reasonable doubt. The physical evidence was circumstantial, he said. The nail marks could have come from anything. But then the prosecution revealed the affair. How did they find out? Richard told them. Went to the police, heartbroken and confused. Said his wife's best friend had been pursuing him for years. That I was obsessed. That I'd threatened to hurt Margaret if he didn't leave her. None of that was true. Of course not. But he had evidence. Text messages he'd carefully manipulated. Screenshots where my words were taken out of context. Photos he'd taken without my knowledge. He made me look like a stalker. Diana's voice turned cold. The man I thought loved me stood in that courtroom and described me as a dangerous obsessive. And part of me wondered if he was right. Abusers document. They keep receipts. They build narratives over months and years as waiting for the moment when those narratives become weapons. Richard hadn't just groomed Diana, he'd groomed the evidence. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty. Life sentence. Tell me about prison. Diana's face went blank, the dissociation returning, an old survival mechanism from childhood. What do you want to know? The cells? The food? The guards? Her voice was flat. Or do you want to know what happens to a woman convicted of killing her best friend in a maximum security prison? Whatever you need to tell me. That the first year was the worst. I was fresh meat. Everyone knew my case. It had been all over the news. The woman who killed her best friend to steal her husband. Some inmates thought I deserved whatever happened to me. She pushed up her sleeve. A thin white scar traced from her wrist halfway to her elbow. Month 4. A group cornered me in the showers, said they were going to teach me what happens to husband stealers. She traced the scar. I fought back. It didn't matter. There were 5 of them. I'm so sorry. Don't be. I survived. That's what I learned to do. Survive. Be invisible, just like I was as a child. Take up no space. Make no enemies. Count backwards from 100 when the panic came. Disappear inside my head when the world got too brutal. Prison had forced Diana back into the same dissociative survival strategies she'd developed as a child. The patterns established by Kevin's abuse, by her mother's neglect, by her father's rigidity, they had kept her alive behind bars. But survival is not the same as living, and the woman who emerged after 5 years carried new scars on top of old ones. How did the truth finally come out? For the first time in our session, something like hope flickered across Diana's face. Caroline, Margaret's younger sister. She never believed I did it. We'd known each other for 15 years. She'd watched me and Margaret become family. And she never trusted Richard. Said there was something off about him, something behind the charm. What did she do? She hired a private investigator, paid for it herself, took a second mortgage on her house, drained her savings. 3 years of searching. Everyone told her she was crazy. Her own parents thought she should let it go. But Caroline Chen was like her sister. When she decided something, nothing could stop her. And she found something. She found someone, Elise Morrison. Richard's actual girlfriend, not his affair, his real relationship. They'd been together for 2 years before Margaret died. She was the one he was planning a future with, the one the insurance money was meant for. And you? I was the decoy, the misdirection. Richard needed someone to take the fall, someone with a plausible motive. I gave him obsession, I gave him opportunity, I gave him my body to create evidence. Diana's voice was hollow. I thought he wanted me. He was just building a scapegoat. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Richard hadn't just used Diana, he had specifically chosen her because of her vulnerabilities, her desperation for attention, her tendency toward obsessive attachment, her history of self-destructive choices. He had recognized a victim and crafted a trap specifically designed for her psychology. How did they catch him? Elise. She didn't know about me. Didn't know about any of it. She thought she was Richard's only secret when the investigator showed her the truth, that he'd framed another woman for murder, that he'd been sleeping with me just to have someone to blame. She broke. What did she do? Went straight to the police, told them everything, including where Richard kept his other phone, a burner he used for communications he didn't want traced. The texts were all there, plans with a man he'd hired, the actual killer, payment records, everything. Richard didn't do it himself. He didn't have the stomach, hired someone to do his dirty work while he established an alibi. Diana's voice hardened. He was at a business dinner when Margaret was murdered, 50 witnesses, but the texts proved he ordered it, paid $50,000 to have his wife killed so he could collect $2 million in insurance and start a new life with Elise. Where is Richard now? Prison. Life sentence. No possibility of parole. She let out a long breath. People say that should make me feel better. Does it? No, because Margaret is still dead, because I still betrayed her, because 5 years of my life are gone, and because I'm still the person who slept with her husband while she was planning to name her daughter after me. Diana met my gaze directly. Justice doesn't change what I did. Nothing changes what I did. Legal innocence is not the same as moral innocence. Diana hadn't murdered her best friend, but she had betrayed her in ways that could never be undone. The real work of therapy wasn't about establishing innocence. It was about something far harder. Learning to live with the truth of who you've been while becoming someone different. We met for 12 more sessions after that first day. 12 weeks of carefully examining the wounds Diana had carried since childhood. 12 weeks of untangling the threads that connected a 7-year-old girl's abuse to a 47-year-old woman's destruction. Trauma creates patterns. Kevin taught Diana that attention, even harmful attention, equaled love. Her mother's neglect taught her she was invisible unless someone chose to see her. Her father's rigidity taught her that expressing needs was dangerous. Richard recognized every one of these wounds and exploited them precisely. He offered visibility and desire, the two things her traumatized psyche craved most. In our 7th session, Diana said something I'll never forget. I've been thinking about what you said, about how understanding doesn't mean excusing, about how knowing why I did what I did doesn't make it okay but makes it survivable. Yes. Exactly. I think I've been punishing myself since I was 7 years old, for what Kevin did. I thought somehow it was my fault, that there was something wrong with me, something broken that made him do those things. And every time I made a destructive choice as an adult, it confirmed what I already believed, that I was damaged, unfixable, unworthy of real love. And now I understand. I was a child. Kevin was a predator. My mother didn't protect me because she couldn't see beyond her own survival. My father's rules were about control, not love. None of it was my fault. She took a breath, steadying herself. But the affair was my choice. A broken, desperate, self-destructive choice. But mine. I didn't kill Margaret, but I hurt her in ways she never knew. And I have to carry that. Can you forgive yourself? Not yet. Maybe not ever. She met my gaze with clear eyes. But I can try to understand myself. And maybe understanding is the first step toward becoming someone who wouldn't make those choices again. Healing isn't linear. It isn't about reaching a destination where the pain disappears. It's about learning to carry the weight differently, building new neural pathways that don't lead to self-destruction. teaching yourself, slowly and carefully, that you deserve more than crumbs of attention from people who see your wounds as opportunities to exploit. In our final session, Diana told me she was moving, leaving the city, starting over somewhere no one knew her story. I visited Margaret's grave last week, she said, told her everything, the affair, the guilt, how much I loved her and how terribly I failed her. How did it feel? Like putting down something I'd been carrying for too long. She smiled, a real smile, fragile but genuine. I'll never be who I was before all this, but maybe I can become someone new. Someone who understands her own patterns, someone who won't fall into the same traps. That's all any of us can do, Diana. Become someone who knows themselves well enough to choose differently. She stood, shook my hand, and said something that made me understand why her story would stay with me. Thank you, Dr. Bennett, for being the first person who didn't just see what I did, you saw why I did it. And somehow that made me feel less like a monster and more like a person. A broken person, but still a person. She walked out of my office that day. I never saw her again. But I think about her. I hope she found peace. I hope she found herself. I hope somewhere right now she's building a life where her worth isn't determined by who wants her, but by who she chooses to be. I hope this story has helped you see your own life, your emotions, or the people around you from a different perspective. I hope it has helped you understand yourself and others a little better. I would love to hear from you in the comments. I would love to know you and your story a little better. If you want to share what's inside you, you can write to the email address in my profile. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Click the bell icon to turn on notifications so you'll know when the next true story is ready. Before we end, I want to ask you a few questions. Take a moment to think about them. What do you think about Diana's story? Does her journey remind you of anything in your own life or in the lives of people you know? Do you believe Diana is truly innocent? She didn't commit murder, but she betrayed her best friend for 3 years. Where do you draw the line between legal innocence and moral responsibility? What would you say to 7-year-old Diana, the little girl in that quiet house in Ohio? And what would you say to the 47-year-old Diana who walked into my office that first day? How much do our childhood wounds shape our adult choices? Can we ever truly break free from patterns established before we were old enough to protect ourselves? If Margaret could speak now, what do you think she would say to Diana? Forgiveness? Anger? Something in between? And finally, do you think Diana can truly heal? Or are some wounds too deep to ever fully close? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. Your perspective matters. Your voice matters.